G'day guys, Rain Kent here from Raith Electric Skateboards. Today we're going to do a service on the rotating assembly of my prototype Vengeance, just to demonstrate how to service your rotating assembly, and a few tips and tricks in doing so. Alright everyone, here we are. This is my prototype Vengeance. We're going to be doing a service on the rotating assembly just here. Excuse the crudeness of this video. This is a little bit of a dirty process, and excuse the tape and the prototype board. The production boards look a lot nicer than this. So we're going to go ahead and start the process, but first I'm just going to run through the tools that you're going to need. So starting off, you're probably going to need a small screwdriver. This helps in a couple of the aspects of the process. You're going to need a 1.5mm Allen key. You're going to need a permanent marker, a ratcheting socket number 13 that fits. Some sockets don't fit into the hole, so make sure you get one that does. You're going to need some low odor kerosene or normal kerosene. You're going to need a Coke bottle, and you're going to use that Coke bottle to clean the needle roller bearing and also the wheel bearings. Alright, so starting off, we're going to remove the wheel nut. So we're going to undo the wheel nut and remove the wheel nut, put it to the side. So the next step is to remove the wheel and rotating assembly. This can be a little tricky. I've done this a lot of times, so I'm going to make this look very easy, but if you're new to this, you might want to go slowly and just remove the motor very slowly, but I'm going to do it quite quickly just because I've done it before. So you're going to slide it away from the axle and be careful not to strike the motor on the stator or the axle. So I'm just going to do that like so. I made it look a lot easier than it actually is doing it in real life. Be very careful not to strike the magnets on the stator or the axle when you do that. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is get your rag and give the axle a good clean, get rid of any contaminants on there, and you're going to want to grease it just before reassembly. We're not going to do that right now, but we'll just move on with the process. So now you've got your rotating assembly off, i.e. your wheel and your drive collars. So now we're going to remove the outside drive collar, and to do that we need a 1.5mm Allen key. So loosen the spoke screws. Now just a comment about these spoke screws, only do them up finger tight. They're only M2 machine screws, and so if you over torque them they will stretch, and we don't want that. So when you redo these up, make sure you only do them finger tight, and then check these spoke screws before every ride. There is a chance that they will undo themselves over time. It's your responsibility as a rider to keep these tight. Also check your axle nuts before every ride also. So we'll remove the outside drive collar. Undo these and put the parts to the side for cleaning. So just be careful not to knock the screws into the axle hole. So we've removed the outside drive collar, turn it upside down to remove the screws, and place the outside drive collar to the side. Now the next step is to remove the inner drive collar and the motor. Now before we do this, we want to get our permanent marker, and we're going to mark a line to annotate the location that we removed it from, so that when we reinstall it, it's going back in the same spot. So make a line on the side of the wheel and the motor like so, and then remove the inner drive collar. So now you can see we've got our rotating assembly or inner drive collar and motor, and we've got our wheel which has its bearings and its spacer. So the next step is to remove the bearings, and to do that we need to place the bearing on the axle and then wiggle the wheel, and then your spacer is going to pop out, and place your bearings to the side, and then do the same with the second bearing. So now you've removed your two bearings, your spacer, you've got your wheel, and now you've got your drive collar and outside section of the motor. Now you notice that there is a needle roller bearing here. This needle roller bearing needs to be cleaned and lubricated, and in order to do so we need our Coke bottle that is filled to the correct level with kerosene. And what the kerosene will do is dissolve any old oils or grease inside the needle roller bearing. So be careful when you put your screwdriver anywhere near the magnets, because the screwdriver will actually be attracted to the magnets. So be very careful when you're inserting anything ferrous into the inside of the motor. Now what we're doing now is just rotating the needle roller bearing and dissolving any old grease and oil in that needle roller. You know, you can leave this to soak overnight if you want, but the whole purpose of this Coke bottle is that it keeps the kerosene away from the glue that near the magnets, which has been used to glue the magnets on. You know, over time the chemicals may affect the bond of the glue, so we're going to try to avoid that exposure. So when you're happy that you've cleaned out this needle roller bearing sufficiently, we're going to remove it from the kerosene and we're going to clean it up. And to do that you're going to need your rag again. So place that to the side. Now you can service all four wheels at the same time, but you must be careful to reinstall the motor on its back into its original location. So you can save a little time by doing that. I'm not going to do that right now. You know, okay, so I'm using this rag to, you know, give this drive collar a good clean. I'm also going to insert it into here to remove the excess kerosene from the inside of the motor, trying not to get the kerosene on the magnets. So we're going to try and remove the kerosene and the contaminants from the needle roller bearing, and to do that it's quite simple actually. I'll show you in a moment. So we're going to get the rag and we're going to stick it over the end of the screwdriver, and we're going to stick the screwdriver in and rotate the drive collar on the screwdriver, just so we got that rag working to remove that kerosene. And you can do this a couple of times, and you can actually spin the motor on the rag, so when we're removing all those contaminants out of the needle roller. Probably easier said than done, but nonetheless that's what we're doing. So that looks pretty clean to me. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lubricate this needle roller bearing with grease. So you're going to need a type of grease. I'm going to use wheel bearing grease for this application. Now you can see that needle roller bearings inside there is rotating freely, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my tub of grease, and I'm going to get a little bit of grease on the end of my screwdriver here, and I'm going to apply it to inside the needle roller bearing. Now this is going to be a little bit of a messy procedure, but we can clean it up a bit later on. You want to try and get as much grease in to the needle roller as you possibly can, trying not to make a mess. I'm going to do that like so. So we've applied quite a significant amount of grease to that now. It's likely that the grease will escape afterwards, but that's okay. So place that to the side and then wipe the grease off on the rag, the excess grease. Try not to get grease all over yourself. And then clean up the grease. With the rag. Now the grease is a better option than oil because it will last significantly longer than oils. Obviously it's going to be a little bit more difficult to remove at the end of the day, but it will last longer and give you longer service intervals. Just removing a little bit of excess grease with the screwdriver there. Alright, so now you've got a cleaned and lubricated drive collar. So the next step would be to wash the wheel bearings out with kerosene and then apply grease to them also. You know, the way of doing that is to remove the shield. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remove it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, we can. So you remove the shield on both bearings. Needle probably works better, but in this case this is working. So then we're going to soak these bearings and clean the bearings in the kerosene, and then we're going to apply grease to the bearings in a similar fashion with the screwdriver. So we're going to drop it in the kerosene, and we're going to soak those bearings. And that you can leave them to soak for a little while, and in the process of doing that, you can give the wheel a little bit of a clean. I've cleaned this a little bit before I started the video, so it's a little bit cleaner than the other wheels, as you can see. So, you know, once we've soaked these for a little while, you can put them down on the towel. And another note is that I recommend putting a towel down. It just catches any dirt and byproducts of this process. So now we've got bearings that are full of kerosene. We need to try and remove that kerosene from the inside of the bearing. And then we're going to try to apply grease to the bearing afterwards. Now you can do all 4 bearings at one time, but just remember what I said. Keep track of which motor came off which axle and which wheel came off which axle. Now if you don't remove all the kerosene from the bearing, the kerosene will probably dissolve the wheel bearing grease a little bit, but in this instance they're fairly clean, so it's going to be okay. So what I'm going to try and do is apply grease to these bearings now. So we're going to dip into the grease again with the screwdriver, and we're going to try and apply grease to these bearings. The difference between bearings on an electric skateboard and bearings on a normal longboard is that electric skateboards tend to travel longer distances and the bearings will actually heat up. So you want to try and use a a grease that is going to respond better to the temperature than the oils and lubricants that you see in the longboard realm. So we've got that quite nicely greased. It's full of grease in there. So we're going to reinstall the shield on that bearing and then give it a clean. Give it a bit of a clean with a rag. And that bearing's lubricated. And if you do get a little bit of grease in the middle of the bearing, you can just poke it through like so and clean it out. Right, so that's a greased bearing. So we're going to place that to the side there, and we're going to grab a little bit more grease. And now you obviously don't need to use grease in a container that size. You can buy it in smaller sizes. And I'd recommend doing so. I just had this laying over from doing a wheel bearing job on my car. So we're going to try and apply this grease to the bearing. I probably need a little bit more. Alright. You'll notice that you'll get to a stage where it's essentially saturated with grease, which is good. I'm going to install the shield, give it a bit of a clean. Now this should give you somewhere between 1,000 and a couple of thousand Ks of use before your next service, depending on the type of use, and if you're riding through dusty conditions or so on and so forth. It's really up to the rider to determine how long between intervals is required, but somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000 kilometers. Really depends on how you're using these devices. All right, so now we've lubricated the bearings, the kneader rollers, the kneader roller bearing, and the two wheel bearings. So now what we're going to do now is reinstall this setup, but we'll just put a bit of grease on the 10mm section of the shaft there where the kneader roller runs, just so it slides on nicely. Give that screwdriver a clean because you're going to need it. Alright, so now we're going to reinstall the bearing. To do that, push it into its location and push it on the axle, drive it home. Now you're going to want to drop the spacer in. Now it's important to note that the spacers are specific to Raith skateboards, so you're going to need to use our exact spacer. It's 9.8mm wide, and it provides a preload to the bearings in the wheel. So I'm just going to drive that bearing home, place it on the axle, and just make sure that those bearings are seated, which they are. So we're looking good. So now we're going to reinsert the motor into the drive collar, like so. It might not insert as nicely as this. You might, and if it doesn't, you're going to need to use the special service tool, which is a non-ferrous shaft that you can push on this section of the motor and push it into the wheel and drive it home into its spot in the wheel. In this case, we don't need that, and we're just going to reinstall the outside drive collar. In this case, I've already cleaned it, so you can use a rag to clean it, or clean it any way you see fit. Make sure that you install it with the holes aligning with the inside drive collar, and then install your 5 spoke screws. Now, I think this is a fairly simple procedure. Let me know in the comments if you had any trouble with something, and I'll post an additional video just going through the process, and if there's problems and so on and so forth, I'm more than happy to answer your questions. As you can see now, I'm tightening the spoke screws, and keep in mind that you just tighten these hand tight because they are M2s and they will stretch. So I'm doing it in a sort of the same pattern that you would do if you were tightening up the wheel nuts of a car wheel. So once you've tightened all of them, I do a final pass on them. Just make sure they're all finger tight. As you can see, I'm just making them finger tight. And so I've done all 5. So now we are good to go in installing this wheel back on the axle. So when you do this, you're going to want to push the spacer into a position where the axle will slide in. When you do this, be very careful not to strike the end of the axle on the magnets, and keep the axle in the center when you're installing it. So we're going to install it. It's going to slide on due to the magnetic pull of the magnets. So as you can see, we've reinstalled it now. So you can give the axle nut a little bit of a clean, and then we're going to reinstall it. Get it started by hand first, remember, and then tighten it with the ratchet. And there is a torque value assigned to this, but I do it hand tight. So as you can see, it's about this tight. Now you've successfully serviced your rotating assembly. You're going to need to do this 4 times for a Vengeance, or twice for a 2-wheel drive board. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it's been informative. Let me know if you'd like me to do any additional videos. Thanks for your time.